It looks like virus sufferers could suffer health effects for years, but good news, things like hydroxychloroquine plus zinc are now shown to work against COVID-19, as well as ivermectin. We're going to cover all of that. Plus, we're going to look at the difference between New Zealand and the UK, and by extension, the US. Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Chris Martenson. I'm here with your daily update for the honey badger virus. So named because it's a fearsome foe. You just don't want to tangle with it, and it can escape almost any enclosure. Today is actually May 14th, day 112. Looks like I forgot to update my my slide right here. So let's make sure we get that correct, because we wouldn't want to miscount anything. The title's right. I'm calling this one This Generation's Polio. But first, before we get to that, let's look at the email of the day. This came in from KDH. Hi, Chris and Adam. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that your YouTubes and diligence to data has helped many, and myself and family are one of them. From watching and listening to you, we were able to stop my 78-year-old mother from flying from Canada to the UK at the beginning of March to attend her sister's funeral. Oh, that's very sad, of course, but congrats on doing that. She was then going to travel on to Spain and stay with relatives before returning. What a disaster that would have been if we hadn't convinced her to cancel. Absolutely. March in Spain, no thanks. As disappointing as it was for her not to attend, instead we videoed her giving tribute to her sister and then were able to watch the funeral live streamed. That's sweet. That's good. Now that March and April are in the rearview mirror, we are all breathing a huge sigh of relief that we are all healthy and well set up from listening to you. It really did all unfold as you were showing many weeks beforehand. Before our province of British Columbia declared a stay at home in the middle of March, I was able in January and February to get weights for my 14-year-old son, puzzles for my mother, lots of art supplies for my daughter, masks from Home Depot, food under normal buying conditions, and gardening supplies. We are doing fine so far into this lockdown with not much to complain about at all. I do get bouts of anxiety about our species' future, especially since I have two young teenagers, but thanks again to you and Adam, I have downloaded Prosper for free and am making my way through it. And by the way, everybody, Prosper is the book Adam and I wrote, and you can get a free download of that if you watch all the way to the end and then click a link or a couple links. As a side note, it's not just the pandemic info that has helped. I also like how you guide your viewers to properly look at the data and the wording of papers to find the facts. It's all very interesting, and I look forward to learning from you 5 days a week. You are also the reason that I know it's the weekend, as all days can be the same now. Thanks. I do need my weekends off. So that's the only way I know it's weekend too. Thanks so much to you both, and happy gardening from one green thumb to another. I'm fine with KDH being used if you want to show this email to the public, but mostly this thanks is so that you and Adam really are aware of the heartfelt gratitude. Well, thank you, KDH. Thank you for taking all these actions. Thank you for taking care of your mother. And thank you for also giving me an opportunity to get in here and point out that this is really what it's all about for me, is that we are capable of looking at things for ourselves, deciding for ourselves what's real and what's not. I got into kind of a tangle up with a lot of virologists who probably aren't used to having a lot of light shined on their profession. But it became really unpleasant. I got called a bunch of names, including today, including being called an a-hole by one of them, simply because I keep asking the same questions, which are things like, where did that polybasic furin cleavage site come from? And they keep saying stuff like, it just came naturally. That's the end of it. And I'm like, that's not really scientific. And I'm not here to tell you I know it came from a lab. I'm here to say that you can't definitively say it came from nature. But I'm offended a little. I have to learn how to get rid of this edge, because I'm a scientist at heart. You know what I like? I really, really appreciate the method of being able to consider all sides of something, to be able to let the data tell the tale, and then when the data changes, to be able to modify my point of view around that. It's an important part of the scientific method. And I do have a conclusion that I do believe that in the United States, possibly elsewhere, science has really become denigrated as a practice, as a method. It's become not even scientific. It's become more about beliefs and all things like that. So we discussed beliefs yesterday and how you can detect if you're up against somebody who's spouting beliefs rather than an opinion is because they get emotional about things, and they'll take that attacking stance and storm off and do things like that and call names, all because they don't want to have their beliefs looked at. And if it's bad enough, they'll endure a backfire effect, meaning every fact you bring to the table that cuts against what they want to be true in the world will actually strengthen their false view of that world. And so we see a lot of that going on all the time. But at any rate, we have to maintain an open mind about the honey badger virus because it's got this ridiculous affinity for the ACE2 receptor. It's got ridiculous affinity for the CD147 receptor. It's got this furin cleavage site that gives it not just human, but apparently multi-species spillover. It's spilled into cats, dogs, the tigers. I mean, it's who knows what else, right? So it's really, if it was from nature, oh my gosh, nature really threw a curveball. And because of that, we don't really know what's going on with this virus yet. Remember when it first started in January and it's early February, doctors were putting everybody on ventilators. And now we know that is not the standard of care. It looked like ARDS. It's not ARDS. And now we've plowed through a lot of the data and we know a lot more about this particular virus. So let's get to some of that. We've been talking for a while about the lingering effects. We talked about some of this data 2 days ago, I believe. This comes out on May 12th. This is Bloomberg. It says here more than 1 million people around the world have been deemed recovered from the coronavirus, but beating the initial sickness may be just the first of many battles for those who have survived. Some recovered patients report breathlessness, fatigue, and body pain months after first becoming infected. Small-scale studies conducted in Hong Kong and Wuhan, China show that survivors grapple with poor functioning in their lungs, heart, and liver. And that may be the tip of the iceberg. The coronavirus is now known to attack many parts of the body beyond the respiratory system, causing damage from the eyeballs to the toes, the gut to the kidneys. Patients' immune systems can go into overdrive to fight off the infection, compounding the damage done. And I believe that this damage that's happened, so for people at least who've been hospitalized, let's just say right now it's a little crude where we say, oh, people either died from coronavirus or they recovered. Okay. I'm pretty sure died is just one category, but recovered isn't a single category. It spans from people who got it and barely had any symptoms or maybe didn't even have any symptoms they were aware of, all the way up to people who count as recovered because they're not dead, but they're severely damaged. And that's a very wide spectrum. And we don't have a good sense yet of the statistics around that. And we're going to need more time. In a year, we'll know more. But for now, this information is enough for me to say, I don't want this. But if I do get it, I want to make sure I start with a low inoculum. That's why everybody wears a face mask, because that face mask will prevent you, if you do get sick, from at least getting sick with a big, giant bolus of virus that can give you a much worse outcome. And as well, I want my terrain, the body, as the French say, ma terrain, my body to be as tuned up as possible with the right vitamins and the right minerals so that it can fight off the infection. Because remember, nobody gets better from this disease because they were given a magic pill by anybody. You get better because you survived long enough so your body could recognize it and fight it off. Well, give your body the best chance it can of fighting it off. Very complicated thing, requires a lot of different moving parts and pieces, including things like vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, selenium, things like that, maybe melatonin. All right. So this thing, though, that we now know that, this whole idea here that survivors may have very long-lasting damage, right? Well, that confers really well with what we presented a couple days ago, which says that the military is going to allow unhospitalized COVID-19 survivors to join the military, but not anybody who is in the hospital, right? And so I believe I've been corrected that I said I didn't know of any other viruses that the military had this stance on, but I believe they do have this stance on HIV. But at any rate, if you have been hospitalized with COVID, right now the Military Entrance Processing Command is saying, no thanks, we don't want you. So, and I believe that's because they know as well as anybody that you don't want to accept somebody who's got possibly a lifetime of damage, because you're really just hiring on somebody who's going to become a drain on your VA system and not much of an add to your forces. All right, continuing with this awesome article in Bloomberg, because it had the quote that I think really defines this very, very well in it. This generation's polio. SARS infected just 8,000 people. I'll put the word just in there. With more than 4 million and more every day infected by the coronavirus, the long-term damage to health could strain social safety nets and healthcare infrastructures for years to come, as well as have implications for economies and companies. The prospect led Nicolas Hart, the British physician who treated Prime Minister Boris Johnson, to call the virus this generation's polio, a disease that could leave many marked by its scars and reshape global healthcare. What these chronic issues ultimately look like and how many patients ultimately experience them will have huge implications for patients, the doctors who treat them, and the health systems around them, said Kimberly Powers, an epidemiologist at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who is developing models on the virus's spread to inform public health efforts. So this generation's polio, absolutely. This, there are going to be a lot of people who may well bear the scars of this for decades to come. And this, too, speaks to why the whole idea of just, let's just get to herd immunity real quick. Let's just open things up. You know what? Only old people and infirm die. And so it's no worse than the flu by the numbers. But actually, it's much worse than the flu by the numbers. And this is something we continually stress. Here's one way to look at that. The case fatality rate is how many people get the case and die from it. The infection fatality rate is how many people in total had the thing. So the cases, these are cases that end up in the hospital. Infection includes people who got it and didn't even show symptoms. So I'm convinced that the Diamond Princess is going to give us some sort of a readout on this, because remember, the Diamond Princess first started catching cases back. I think it was my first read on that was, I think, February 4th. So what is that? Like 3 months ago now. There was an entire population cohort of maybe, 3,600 people on the ship. 712 of them were tested positive as having caught this thing. And I think this was good epidemiology, because I believe they really tested everybody on that ship. So far, 13 people have died. And that gives us a case fatality rate so far of 1.8%. Now, if everybody else recovers, and there's still 48 active cases, and there are still 4 people in serious or critical condition. By the way, just think of how damaging that is. These people would have gotten sick with about a 7-day incubation period, and maybe 7 days before they really got bad, so 14 days after that. So basically from the end of February, so that would have been March, April, half of May, 2.5 months minimum. These 4 people have been in the hospital. 2.5 months. That's just devastating. But at any rate, if that's it, if all these people recover, all these active cases, and I don't know what that means. Are these people all feel fine, but they're still testing positive? Are they not well? Are they in the hospital? I don't actually know what's going on here. But to me, this is just, we'll get to this in just a second. Let me just stop there and say, let's pretend all of these people recover. Then the CFR would equal the IFR. Okay, the case fatality rate and the infection fatality rate would both settle around this number of 1.8%. So that's our minimum. Well, what would be a larger number? Larger number would be maybe this one, where let's imagine all 4 of these serious or critical people die. And so we add them to this 13. That gives us 17. 17 divided by 712 means a case fatality rate of about 2.3%. Or, in the worst possible case, these 4 die, all 48 of these die, these 13 are already dead. We add them up, we get to a number called 65, and that would lead to a 9.1% as a maximum. So if we use the Diamond Princess as a study, and by the way, it might not be a perfect study, because we could argue that the people who are on cruise ships tend to be older than average. That's a fair point. But in terms of having a population where at least we had the boundaries drawn around it, we have a container around this thing. We know exactly how many people got it, and we can now track them. And by the way, they also got some of the best medical care you could get at the time. I would argue we have better medical care today because we know a lot more. But given what all of that and all those various caveats, we would say that the CFR and the IFR are going to settle somewhere between 1.8 and 9.1%. My honest guess is it actually settles somewhere right around 2 to 3%. I'm leaning towards 2% here. All right. This brings me to the next piece. Let me go here. Do I want to do this? Yeah, we'll do this. So there's a lot of talk about how this is kind of like SARS and it's getting compared to SARS, and we just saw it compared to SARS up here, right? In this article, they said, well, SARS infected 8,000 people, and it's kind of like SARS. Nah, it's really not like SARS at all. First, very, very high serious complication rate. And the treatment itself is very complicated, very complex. More people who caught SARS died from it. SARS Classic, I mean. And SARS-CoV-2, or the honey badger virus, it attacks many more organs and has a much wider range of complications associated with it than SARS. And it doesn't attack one lung, it attacks both lungs, all of that. So it has a lot of very, very serious things going on here. This multiple organ damage, though, is that might be permanent, is really a troubling thing. Now, the good news, though, is that we are starting to get some news finally out of hydroxychloroquine. Now, remember, I've been on this for a while just saying, look, I'm not saying it works. I'm not promoting it. I wanted the data. What I really wanted was a double-blind placebo-controlled trial. I still don't have that. Okay. What we do have is we have this study that's coming to us out of these places here, out of New York City mostly. Okay. This is a pretty promising study, though. Hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin plus zinc versus hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin alone. So as you just noticed something here, zinc is the independent variable in this. Both treatment groups are getting hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, but one group is also getting zinc. So that's interesting. I actually wanted to see hydroxychloroquine plus zinc against random double-blind controls where there are other people who are getting a placebo. And then I wanted to see that because what we really want to know is how does hydroxychloroquine plus zinc, or plus azithromycin if you want, how do those compare against other standards of care? So that would have been good to know. But here, what do we get in this study? We get to see the difference between hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin plus zinc versus hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin alone. All right, what happened here? What are the study methods? What they did here, they performed a retrospective analysis of data from patients hospitalized with confirmed SARS-CoV-2 infection. So it's confirmed. Everybody had a swab and they tested positive, plus they had other symptoms. Data was collected from electronic medical records for all patients being treated with admission dates. So this was between March 2nd and April 5th. Patients were admitted to any of 4 acute care NYU Langone hospitals across New York City. Patients were included in the study if they were admitted to the hospital. So if they came and they left, they weren't included in the study. They had at least one positive test for COVID-19, received hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, and had either been discharged from the hospital, transitioned to hospice, or expired. So that idea of transition to hospice, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I'm going to have to look that up, but I'm wondering about those 4 Diamond Princess patients who are lingering there 2.5 months later. I'm wondering if that counts as a hospice setting. I don't know what that means. Patients were excluded from the study if they were never admitted to the hospital, as they just said, or if there was an order for other investigational therapies, including tocilizumab. I'm not sure if that C is hard or not. That's the monoclonal antibody, I believe, against interleukin-6. Nitazoxanide, rituximab, that's another monoclonal antibody, remdesivir, lopinavir, any of these antivirals down here. So if they're getting anything else, antibodies, monoclonal antibodies against certain things and or antivirals out of the study. Okay, so that's what they did. And so I just wish that zinc wasn't the variable in this. I kind of wish that all those zinc plus azithromycin and hydroxychloroquine was the variable against nothing. But at any rate, here's what we got. So we can tease something out. Really cool finding here, by the way. Patients were categorized based on their exposure to hydroxychloroquine. They gave a 400 milligram load followed by 200 milligram twice daily for 5 days. That's a little more than we've been reading about before. We've been reading about 400 mgs up front and then 200 mgs once daily. Here they're doing it twice daily. So that's a little bit higher, but that's cool. And azithromycin, 500 mgs once daily alone or with zinc sulfate. So they're using the sulfate version here with a big old load, 220 milligram capsule containing 50 mgs elemental zinc twice daily, BID, for 5 days as treatment in addition to standard supportive care. All right. So that's what they did. What did they find? Well, the first thing is they said, no difference between when they say zinc or no zinc up here. Here's zinc. Whoops, not that one. I want the other one. I want my yellow one. They say zinc or no zinc. Remember, in both cases, they're getting hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. So the p-value, remember, a p-value of 0.05 is significant. 0.646, not significant, not significant, not significant, not close, 0.08, but it's not 0.05. 0.4, 0.53, nothing. So there's nothing significant here. What wasn't significant? Well, there was no difference between zinc and no zinc in length of hospital stay in days. So the average here was 6. Well, that's a little less than we've been seeing out of other things where what was the remdesivir study? I believe they said they'd knocked it from 14 down to 11 days, and they stopped the trial. That was so significant. People were only staying for 11 days. I'm seeing a 6 here. And again, this can't all be fully compared. I'm just saying I wish we had that data comparing length of hospital stay with these. There should be one more column here. The controls. Nobody got neither zinc nor no zinc plus the rest of the things. No difference in duration of mechanical ventilation was 5 days in both cases. The ICU in days, how long were you in the ICU? 4.85 to 5.4. No difference in those. O2 flow max rate, what are you getting? I don't know what that is, probably liters per minute or something like that. And no difference in any of these other variables. So not too exciting there. But we had to dig a little deeper, get down to the bottom table. This is super exciting. Check this out. Discharged home. So the N here, the total number of patients was 411 who received the zinc plus HCQ and azithromycin, or we'll just call it Zithro. And 521 didn't get the zinc. So out of this, 317 or 77.1% were discharged home compared to 68.3% p-value, 0.003. This is a statistically significant finding. So they were discharged, more of them were discharged home. How many of them needed ICU? 9.2% with zinc versus 15.7% without zinc, 0.004. Very significant finding. How many of them needed invasive ventilation? 8% compared to 16.5%. More than twice as many needed invasive ventilation without the zinc, 0.014. A very significant finding. How many expired or went to hospice? Here it was 13.1%. compared to 22.8%, okay? And that's, again, very significant finding, 0.001. Now, this takes just a little bit more to decode. How many expired or hospice, 2 asterisks, this is after excluding all non-ICU patients, okay? So they take all the non-ICU patients and they throw them out. So that means they're actually only looking at ICU patients. So what do we know about zithromycin plus hydroxychloroquine and zinc? We know it works early. So when they say after excluding all 9 ICU patients, this is just, hey, what happens if we are giving these combo drugs to people who are already in the ICU? And the answer is no difference. 73.6% here, 74.4%, 0.93, no difference. But what happens if we exclude all the ICU patients, meaning we're going to just start with a patient cohort which hasn't been in the ICU? How did they perform as a group on zinc or no zinc? And here, check this out. 6.9% expired or went to the hospital in the zinc crew here, which was an N of 373. It's a pretty big N. You can start to trust these numbers. And compared to no zinc at 13.2%. So that's 0.004. This is a very, very significant finding right here, and it conforms with everything we've been talking about, which is if you can give this to people before they're in the ICU, that's when it's going to do its best work here, and that's what that is. After excluding all ICU patients, look at that. So I'll tell you what, if this is me, and I am me, and I end up getting this thing, I am going to want zinc plus hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin. I would want that treatment. Now, notice here this study was really just comparing zinc to no zinc, and both groups had azithromycin plus hydroxychloroquine. I'm going to wonder if these numbers here aren't significantly better than if we had one more column over here where we could be comparing this to people who didn't have either hydroxychloroquine or azithromycin. It didn't stop the media, though, from coming out and talking about this triple drug combo. This is how this was written up in the Mail online. And it does say it helped COVID-19 patients. But they note here that this treatment regimen did not, however, change the average time patients spent in the hospital, how long they spent on a ventilator, or the total amount of oxygen required. So they're saying, you could sort of read that and go, well, maybe it didn't work. But again, it didn't change it between these two groups right here. It's not, this interpretation is a little off because it sort of implies that it didn't change it for people compared to a control. So that's not the correct conclusion there, but I understand how those mistakes get made. As well, ivermectin works. We talked about this one a while back. I just want to bring this forward because I'm really trying to build a case here for a different standard of care than the one that's been promoted by, say, the CDC, by the WHO, by all those other and all the big pharma companies who want to sell very expensive things. Ivermectin, not a very expensive thing at all. It's basically used as an antiparasitic, and it's a very common drug. It's made cheaply. So this study said, what did they do? Participants, they had hospitalized patients that had been diagnosed with COVID-19, determined by the presence of a positive laboratory finding confirming SARS-CoV-2 infection. They gave ivermectin 150 micrograms per kilogram, administered once, compared with COVID-19 patients receiving medical therapy without ivermectin. So that's it, a single dose. What was the main outcome? The principal outcome was to assess the association of ivermectin administration with survival in COVID-19. So that was their primary endpoint they were looking at. What did they find? The cohort, including 704 ivermectin treated and 704 controls, was derived from 169 hospitals across 3 continents with COVID-19 illness. The patients were matched for age, sex, race, or ethnicity, comorbidities, and an illness severity score. All right, so they tried to match them up as best they could, make sure that some other confounding factors like age, sex, race, all that stuff wasn't explaining the results they had. Of those requiring mechanical ventilation, fewer patients died in the ivermectin group, 7.3% versus 21.3%. Wow, that's a big difference. And overall death rates were lower with ivermectin, 1.4% versus 8.5%. Very significant findings here. Super duper significant. P value under 0.0001. So here you see that of those requiring mechanical ventilation, they had 21.3%. 21.3% died of those who were actually on got onto a mechanical vent, and not all that different from people who 22.8% in this study right here for people who went into the serious side of things. Not totally comparable, but just trying to see how these things line up. All right, conclusions and relevance. The administration of ivermectin during COVID-19 illness in hospitalized patients is associated with a lower mortality and hospital length of stay. These findings require confirmation in randomized controlled trials. Yeah, and if you had that data more than a month ago and you were in an intact culture, they'd be trying this stuff out right away, and you'd be hearing all about it. I mean, if remdesivir had this sort of a result, stop the presses, you'd be hearing about it. It'd be all over the news and just chirping crickets about this stuff right now, as far as I can tell. How does ivermectin work? This is the compound down here, kind of a big, clumsy-looking thing, kind of cool. And a couple of sugar groups, it looks like there, and just big fun thing. So what happens is there's important alpha and important beta, 2 dimers of a protein that whose job it is to take other proteins, not necessarily the coronavirus protein, but this gets hijacked for this purpose, comes in through the nuclear pore complex. So this is in the nucleus of the cell. This is in the cytoplasm of the cell on this side, cytoplasm out here, and it brings it out into the nucleus here, where all the DNA is and all that stuff's happening. And so if the coronavirus protein is brought inside, it leads to enhanced infection, reduced antiviral response. And ivermectin blocks this function. And so it blocks this, and you just don't get any of this import. So the infection is not enhanced. You get a robust antiviral response. So there's something in the coronavirus life cycle which creates a protein that comes into the nucleus and does a lot of damage over here, okay? And shuts down the cell's ability to defend itself. And so ivermectin blocks that. So it's an antiviral And it's antiviral in the sense that it blocks something the virus likes to do that helps it out. All right, moving on as well, we see that there is a Kawasaki-like illness in children. A number of you sent this to me, so I thought I'd talk about it real quick. That coronavirus spurs a spike in this serious blood disorder in children. It's really very rare still, but compared to baseline, it's a huge spike, but still rare. So before you get all worried about it, let's just make sure we have these numbers in context. The coronavirus may have triggered a 30-fold jump in cases of a serious but rare pediatric inflammatory disease, according to an Italian study that provides an ominous warning to other pandemic-affected nations about the risk to children. A detailed study from Bergamo, the epicenter of the Italian COVID-19 outbreak, found 10 cases, that's just 10 cases in an entire region, of a Kawasaki-like disease-like illness in children, according to reports, and about 90 similar cases from New York and England. So 100 total out of Italy, New York, and England. So very rare here still, but worth being aware of. Kawasaki disease is a rare condition that typically affects children younger than 5. It causes blood vessels to become inflamed and swollen. Typical symptoms include fever and rash, red eyes, dry or cracked lips or mouth, redness on the palms of the hands and soles of the feet, and swollen glands. So I just wanted to bring that up again. Super rare, all right? But it's worth noting. And this is just, again, one of the many mysteries of the honey badger virus and what it's capable of doing. We're learning more and more about it all the time. But this new thing here caused me to need to update my SARS-CoV-2 issues list. I started compiling this when I was trying to show that this isn't the flu. And it's not even SARS. So this was way back when people were still confused about those things and thinking SARS was worse or the flu was just as bad. And now, back then I wrote, kids are spared. The younger, the more resistant. Mostly true, except now we had to put this in for a rare Kawasaki-like inflammatory disease. So a little asterisk now around the kids are spared part. All right. We were getting even more data that vitamin D helps prevent COVID deaths. Here, this from May 13th. This is in Ireland, and the researchers there are urging government to change their advice on vitamin D. And get the government to change it, sure, but just tell people to take more vitamin D. You can do that too. A new publication from Dr. Eamon Laird and Professor Rose Ann Kenny, School of Medicine, and the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging, in collaboration with Professor John Rhodes at University of Liverpool, highlights the association between vitamin D levels and mortality from COVID-19. And so what they did here, they analyzed all European adult population studies completed since 1999, which measured vitamin D, and compared vitamin D and then death rates from COVID-19. So they're taking a couple data sets and poring over them to see if anything pops out. And vitamin D produced in the skin from UVB sunlight exposure transported to the liver and then to the kidney, where it's changed into an active hormone that increases calcium transport from food in the gut and ensures calcium is adequate to keep the skeleton strong and free of osteoporosis. So lots of good reasons to have vitamin D. But vitamin D can also support the immune system through a number of immune pathways involved in fighting SARS-CoV-2. Many recent studies confirm the pivotal role of vitamin D in viral infections. This study shows that counterintuitively, countries at lower latitude and typically sunny countries such as Spain and northern Italy had low concentrations of vitamin D and high rates of vitamin D deficiency. These countries also experienced the highest infection and death rates in Europe. The northern latitude countries of Norway, Finland, and Sweden have higher vitamin D levels despite less UVB sunlight exposure, because supplementation and fortification of foods is more common. These Nordic countries have lower COVID-19 infection and death rates. The correlation between low vitamin D levels and death from COVID-19 is statistically significant. So all this, did Sweden, should they shut down? Did they run this open thing? Are they going to get to herd immunity? Blah, blah, blah. You know what? Maybe Sweden just has higher vitamin D levels because they fortify their foods. If that's it, that could be an explanation right there. So again, vitamin D coming in strong. All right. I want to turn now to this video. We'll just listen into this. And this shows the difference between New Zealand, whose prime minister, I think, demonstrated actual leadership. And as you're thinking through, listening to the measures that New Zealand took, Leaders operate on imperfect data and they make strong decisions to protect their people. Managers don't quite get the data and they're worried about bureaucratic stuff. And I think that New Zealand demonstrated leadership. I think Britain is staffed with kind of shoddy managers, same as the United States. Let's listen in here. All right, let me see if I can get this going.
There were some countries who initially talked about herd immunity as a strategy. In New Zealand, we never, ever considered that as a possibility, ever.
And it's important to recognise it's not to stop everybody getting it. You can't do that. It's not possible to stop everybody getting it. And it's also actually not desirable because you want some immunity in the population.
Herd immunity would have meant tens of thousands of New Zealanders dying, and I simply would not tolerate that, and I don't think any New Zealander would.
Perhaps you could sort of kick it on the chin, take it all in one go, and allow the disease, as it were, to move through the population.
We currently have 102 cases, but so did Italy once.
We're not doing the things that sometimes perhaps are happening elsewhere just because it seems like a popularist thing to do.
But the trajectory is very clear. Act now or risk the virus taking hold as it has elsewhere.
That's leadership.
Things like closing schools and stopping big gatherings don't work as well, perhaps, as people think.
We have, for instance, 9 million protective masks already here in New Zealand, should we need them.
Reports that some NHS trusts are running out of protective equipment has caused huge concern.
Due to shortages, we would now have to share masks.
We're still and will continue to track and trace every single one of those cases. We know where they came from, what links to overseas travel, who those individuals were in contact with, so that if someone in that contact group then has COVID, we can continue to trace the line of how people came in contact with it.
People were transferred from
hospitals
into care homes to release pressure on hospitals, but without being tested first. So they were, in effect, carrying the COVID-19 into places where there were lots and lots of vulnerable people.
Every person entering New Zealand will be required to self-isolate for 14 days. These are the toughest restrictions in the world.
Still today, you can continue to fly into the UK with no checks, no measures, no screening, no tests, and no quarantine.
Apply a simple principle. Act like you have COVID-19.
I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody.
Because we believe that decisive action, going hard and going early, gave us the very best chance of stamping out the virus. And it has. We have done what very few countries have been able to do. We have stopped a wave of devastation.
Because I know there will be many people looking now at our apparent success.
Britain is on track to record one of the worst coronavirus death tolls in Europe.
Yeah, so I thought that was not unfairly put together. I think it's quite right. But if we wanted to assess for ourselves and let the numbers do the talking, we could see what the leadership of New Zealand as compared to Britain, how did that turn out? Let's go to the numbers. In the UK, 233,000 total cases, 33,614 total deaths. And if we want to adjust all this on a per population basis, 3,434 cases per 1 million of population. New Zealand, a total of 21 deaths here and a total of 310 cases per 1 million. 1/10, one full order of magnitude less. And that's the difference between leadership and kind of bad managers on the other side. And everything that was being talked about there, halting the inbound infections, ding, and, having plenty of face masks and, telling people, you should act, it's very simple, act as if you have COVID-19 and, washing your hands, and then the aggressive testing and the rigorous contact tracing and all of that, right? And the quarantine for all exposed contacts. New Zealand is running a gold standard coronavirus response, and of course that gives you very different outcomes. And so for all the people who might be listening to this who are thinking, how do we get back to life? What do? You don't just throw up your hands and say, well, this thing beat us. Let's just, let's let COVID have our way with us. You look at the data and you say, what did these countries do? I think I'm going to pick this one. I think I'd like to figure out what New Zealand did, and let's emulate that to some extent, because that's what you have to do if you want to get back to work. All right, and this number 1C here, wash hands and surfaces, that came today very handily from Hardy Lingham here, who said, Chris suggests you need 1C, hygiene, hands and surfaces. So yes, I think that's a great suggestion, and I picked it right up. As well, he went on to say, if we're intellectually honest about it, we can get to an R0 of under 1 with masks and hygiene habits alone. Japan does it without the keep your distance meme. All right, I agree, and that's why I have been saying, and I have said before, I think if we just did these two things right here, but I'll go to 3, because I think that's a good idea. If we just did this column 1 here, I think we could get back to work. I think we could get back on with our lives. I think we could do all sorts of awesome things. If we just did that, that would be amazing, right? And we would get most of the way there. But going to be very hard to undo all of the bad managers who came before and said things like, oh, wearing face masks is actually harmful for you. And people internalize that message. It's going to be very, very difficult to undo that. That's why I squawked about it so loudly at the time, because it was terrible advice and it was being given for the wrong reasons, and it was dead wrong and it was illogical and all those other things. All right, moving on. Conclusions for today. SARS-CoV-2, let's admit this, it's a very, very serious disease. People die from it in significant numbers, and the survivors include an unacceptably large number of people with possibly lifelong physiological deficits. That leads us to say, and agree with that statement from that UK doctor, that this is this generation's polio. And we're going to have to learn to live with it, but that's no reason to get it. And that's why I continue to say I don't want it. I just don't want it. But if I do get it, I'm going to stack the odds in my favor. I'm going to make sure I've got plenty of vitamin D levels. I think a minimum amount that would work is 1,000 units of D3 a day. That's the minimum I've seen recommended. I'm personally taking 5,000. That's not a recommendation for you, but that's what I'm taking. And so, everybody gets to make that decision for themselves. I think if you have that vitamin D, of course, that helps prevent SARS-2 from becoming as serious as it otherwise might. But you know what? I'm going to bet it does that for other viruses as well. So I'm pretty excited to have that and be a more regular routine part of my life. Zinc works. Possibly if you give it with hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, but it works. Ivermectin, it works. And both are really hugely ignored by the sick care systems in place in the US and UK and elsewhere. And we can all debate about the why that is and speculate and all that stuff, but it's just grotesque. And honestly, I think that if there are people who've had an active hand in suppressing treatments that really do work because they have other conflicts of interest or because it rubbed up against a cherished belief system, there ought to be some consequence for that. And in a healthy, intact culture, there would be some sort of consequence for that, possibly a consequence beyond losing your job or having to retire to spend more time with your family and experiencing a temporary moment of shame or something like that. Forget that. I think that if there are things that work, we should be doing everything in our power as humane individuals to bring them forward. We need the studies. I still can't believe that we don't have a full double-blind, placebo-controlled hydroxychloroquine study at this point in time. And if one exists, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm still digging. We'll find it. I just want to know. And finally, the Diamond Princess sets the infection fatality rate or case fatality rate at a minimum of 1.8% and a max of 9.1. My best guess, again, around 2% under current treatment guidelines. But I think it could be a fraction of that if we were using hydroxychloroquine plus ivermectin, vitamin D, zinc, and the other terrain boosters out there. If those were all employed, I think we could get this, the IFR, CFR down much lower than what we're seeing off the Diamond Princess. And so those are all things that are within our control. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. Why are we fighting so hard to have treatments that could help people not only not die, but then have a much better chance at living a full and productive life? Why are we fighting to try and get that information out there? Who are we fighting against, and what's the rationale for it? Listen, all I can tell you is I think that there is a fight at all tells us that we have a very sick culture and that it's not intact, that his priorities are all sorts of messed up. That's what popped out at me in the New Zealand case was the New Zealand Prime Minister was very clearly saying their priorities were not having people die from this and giving clear, consistent communication around this. The results speak for themselves, and that's because the priorities in New Zealand were very different from the priorities of the UK, which I think the United States shares as well. And those priorities include things like making sure the stock market always goes up, making sure bureaucrats don't lose jobs. I don't know what the priorities are, but I got to confess, those priorities are not my priorities. I don't share them. And as I look forward into the future, I think there's wonderful, great things that are actually going to result from all of this. And it's our job to no longer accept and no longer consent to the sort of foolishness that we see going on, which causes some people to reject possible treatments because it conflicts with a belief system, it conflicts with a potential paycheck of theirs, it conflicts with their egos, or any of that stuff. Let's set all that aside and let's just use the data and let's make sure that we are giving the best outcomes we can to as many people as possible. That's why I do what I do. And if you want to keep hearing about how I do what I do, you're going to have to remember to resubscribe, because you'll probably get unsubscribed from this at some point in time. So remember to resubscribe. And that way you can be sure to follow all of this. Again, plant a garden. Remember, this is actually a guerrilla gardening channel, and all of this was just a fancy way for me to get you put some seeds in the ground. That's it. You caught me. That's what I'm really here all about. Someday you'll find out I actually have a compost business, and that's how I'm planning to make my killing in the future. Nah, just kidding. So at any rate, get the garden going, though. Really, honestly, it's going to do you a world of good. You'll get outside, you'll get some vitamin D the natural way, and you'll be eating better food, and it's going to have wonderful benefits for your mental health and well-being. All of that is true, and just might be an important source of nutrition, given how things are unfolding. All right, it's all I have for today, and tomorrow I believe we're going to be bringing you an interview that I've done, possibly, rather than a video that looks like this. And it's a great interview. Can't wait for you to see it. It's around the fourth turning. That's coming out soon. If not tomorrow, then this weekend, I bet. At any rate, we'll get you something, and you'll like it, I think. All right. Hey, remember, hit the like button, but only if you liked this. Not a hard thing to do. You just take your cursor and you wander it all the way down over here and you click the like button. Okay, thanks very much. I would appreciate it if you did like this, if you would click like. That's all. Bye.
Hi folks, Adam Taggart, co-founder of Peak Prosperity, here with good news. In his daily videos, Chris often refers to the book that he and I wrote, Prosper, How to Prepare for the Future and Create a World Worth Inheriting. It presents a practical model for living with greater resilience, and those who read it and followed its advice were much better prepared for the coronavirus outbreak than the average household. Given its heightened relevance to the turbulent times we now find ourselves in, Chris and I want everyone to benefit from this book's formula for better, more secure living. So we're giving the book to you for free. To get your copy, simply visit peakprosperity.com/freebook. We think you'll find this an extremely valuable and inspiring resource for the current COVID-19 outbreak and for being well positioned for any kind of crisis that comes our way in the future. Thanks for listening, and happy reading.